About 2 weeks ago, I came back from 2 weeks in Iran, leading a Fellowship of Reconciliation peacemaking delegation. This is the 9th trip that the Fellowship of Reconciliation has taken to Iran. As I think everyone knows, our governments have been having pretty heavy-duty problems for the last few years. We haven't even had a political relationship. We don't recognize each other as nations for the last 30 years. And there have been threats from this country that Iran is the axis of evil, and that we might start bombing, attacking Iran, etc. So there's been a lot of problems, and so what we were doing is really from the grassroots up, people to people, getting to know each other, hopefully being an alternative to going to war. And hopefully, we've heard about trickle-down theory. Well, we were involved in the trickle-up theory. That if the people can become friends and understand each other, there's greater hope that our nations can live in peace with each other. Well, I'd just like to start out with a few background thoughts, and then we'll start with the slides. The Iranian people we found to be friendly, beautiful, kind, and generous. They love American people and would like more people-to-people contacts and exchanges. They deeply want to live in peace with the American people and the United States. It breaks my heart that our governments have such hostile relations, and that the U.S. would even consider military action against Iran and the Iranian people. Iran is surrounded by countries with which the United States is at war. On one side, in Iraq, we have 135,000 troops and are bombing daily. In Afghanistan, on the other side, we have tens of thousands of troops and are bombing daily. And in Pakistan, we're also dropping bombs, quote, on selected targets, which end up killing lots of civilians. And former President Bush declared Iran part of the axis of evil and threatened to bomb Iran. All options are on the table. It's kind of like a parent saying to their children, if you don't behave, beware. I think President Obama this week made a small step forward in terms of his videotape to the Iranian people, indicating an interest in normalizing relationships with each other. But I think we still have a long way to go to develop the trust where we can really fully respect one another. There are some profound hurts from the past in U.S.-Iranian relations which are hardly known by the American people. The U.S. CIA overthrew the democratically elected government headed by Prime Minister Mossadegh in 1953. That is 56 years ago. And he was one of the very few democratically elected governments in the whole history of Iran. But we overthrew him because he nationalized the oil and wanted the profits to go for the Iranian people rather than to the Western oil companies. The U.S. military shot down an Iranian civilian airliner in 1988, killing all 290 people aboard. And instead of an apology, the U.S. captain who shot down the plane received a medal from the American government. 3, the U.S. government's full support of the Shah, who we put into power after the coup in 1953, even after he became very repressive and used extreme violence against his own people. 4, the U.S. support of Saddam Hussein and Iraq in their aggressive war against Iran in the 1980-88 war, even when he used chemical weapons against the Iranian people. And 5, the U.S. double standard on nuclear weapons. It's okay for Israel to have nuclear weapons, and it's okay for the United States to have over 10,000 nuclear weapons, and even develop a new generation of nuclear weapons, as we're doing now at Livermore Nuclear Weapons Labs. But if Iran even thinks of developing nuclear weapons, this is cause for threatening an attack on Iran. Iran has a rich culture and history over the past 2,500 years. This is evident in their mosques, museums, poets, and universities over the centuries. And of course, we're a pretty new nation on the block. Well, what these slides will do is to share a little bit of the story of the people we met and what we saw, our experiences. I'll end up with a few reflections and then we'll open it up for more questions and discussion. After the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers in the United States, in Iran, people throughout the country lit candles and put them in their windowsills to, in memory of the people who had died on September 11th in the United States. And what this flyer, which we gave out to everybody, and on the back it had who we were and what we were about, we're trying to reclaim the goodwill from the Iranian people and return that from the American people that existed on September 12th, 2001. Next. Yeah. So this is at daybreak in Tehran. Tehran is really quite a large city. I think there's over 10 million people. And it's on three sides surrounded by snow-capped mountains. Really very beautiful. The traffic in Tehran is horrendous. And it's totally disorganized. It's a kind of a free-for-all. But among all the cars and the motorcycles and everything else, people are taking their goods to the bazaar. Next. So this was our delegation of 6. There were 20 people from throughout the United States that had planned to go on this delegation, and only 6 got visas from the Iranian government. This was one of the problems. There was a delegation of religious leaders from Iran coming to the United States about a year ago that the National Council of Churches was organizing a speaking tour around the country. Less than half of them got their visas from the United States. So this is kind of a reciprocal thing. This is Jack Schultz, Quaker from Santa Cruz meeting. This is Max Cooper from Philadelphia, a Jewish person. He works with the unions there. This is Anne Morrell in the middle, who works with the American Friends Service Committee as a fundraiser in New York. That's her husband, Bill, who is retired but worked with the Associated Press most of his life. And then that's yours truly. And then Louis Vitale, Franciscan priest from San Francisco here. So we had a 77-year-old and an 80-year-old, and this is a pretty rigorous trip. So we visited on the first day we were there, and I should perhaps mention that at the airport, we discovered that there are only 300 Americans a year that are visiting Iran. So when we showed up at 1:30, 2:30 in the morning, they weren't quite sure what to do with us. So it took us a couple hours just to get through all the red tape, to be fingerprinted and go to the superior, and the superior to see who these folks are and whether they should be allowed in the country. So this is the Shah's palace. This is the person that we put in power. And he lived in a pretty luxurious life. And in contrast with that, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the leader of the Islamic Revolution that threw the Shah out in '79, this was his 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Tehran. This is the Shah. Next. This is his humble home. This is the inside of his humble home. A vase with his family.
Did you go there, or did you get those pictures?
What?
Did you go there, or you?
Yes.
Oh, you got it?
No. These are all pictures that we took. Yes. Very beautiful, but when you compare it to the way most Iranian people were living, it didn't seem very fair. So Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran after 15 years in exile and established a fundamentalist Islamic government. And many people who know Iran say that the United States, by overthrowing that democratic elected government in '53, who was quite moderate, certainly not fundamentalist, we sowed the seeds for radical Islam, which is flowering now in Iran. Many people see Khomeini almost as a god. I mean, he was helping deliver them from this very repressive Shah. Yes. That's his home again. And this was, it's not quite like Gandhi, but this was where he spent most of his time. This was his living room, sofa. Next. And this was the mosque, which was right next to his home, where he would kind of hold forth with teachings to the people who would come. Next. And this was a little museum next to his home, which had, as you'll see, photographs of the Ayatollah. First had to go into exile because of threats against his life, and then coming back, and the crowds of people listening and greeting him. Next. Next. So one of the parts of Iran that I hadn't expected, but was the bazaars, where there are hundreds of small shops where people are selling everything from beautiful scarves to rugs to food and spices, etc. These are, and as we walked along, people would say, "Where are you from?" "Oh, from America." And I think every last person, they had a great big smile and say, "Welcome to Iran. We're so glad to have you here." These folks gave me this little symbol of Zoroastrianism, which is a symbol of peace and understanding.
Is Zoroastrianism tolerated in the
Yes.
Islamic Republic?
It is. I'll talk about that later, but Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity are totally tolerated. And people from those religious groups told us they can practice totally freely. Children can decide to go to a Jewish school or to the public school, and they can practice without problem. The Baha'i, you should probably know, are the one group that are not tolerated. And the official reason is that Muslims believe that all the prophets up till Muhammad and through Muhammad were from God. So they totally respect Jesus, as being a very legitimate prophet. But the Baha'is, their religious leader came since Muhammad. And so he's not legitimate. So here are some peace buttons. A lot of, a whole lot of this was homemade. So here's a jeweler. Louis and I had, we had forgotten our fingernail clippers, so we bought from this guy, between us we bought a fingernail clipper, made in Iran. This is the fellow we met, and when he heard that we were Americans, he came out and says, "Welcome to Iran. We're so glad to have you here. We would like to see many more Americans come. But please, when you come, leave your guns at home."
What's the prevalence of English? What's the prevalence of English as a study?
A lot of people could speak English. We didn't have trouble in the parks or in the bazaars finding people who could speak English. It's probably the second language. This is the rug bazaar. These rugs were very beautiful, but too expensive and too heavy to bring home, but I at least took some photographs. So another thing that really impressed me was the the really beautiful mosaics in their mosques and their churches and other buildings. Next. This is all mirror work above. Next. So around the mosque, there would often be these signs, which are about so big that were often on the picket fence, with sayings from the Quran. Never will you attain the stand of a good doer unless you spend in the way of Allah of what you love. So it's just to remind ordinary folks of some of the parts of the Quran, if not everybody's been reading it. And you should treat women, what was that?
Honorably.
Honorably, yes. And that's in Arabic and in Farsi and English. The mosques were absolutely gorgeous.
Is it a sort of mosques everywhere you look situation?
What's that?
Is it a mosques everywhere you look
Yeah.
situation?
Tell me if I'm getting in the way here. Come on over.
She was asking if there are mosques
Everywhere you look, everywhere you turn, you can see a mosque.
Not everywhere, but there are a lot of them. This is in Qom, which is the religious capital of Iran, probably 2 hours from Tehran. And this is a library, and this Ayatollah's father had started this library, and it's filled with religious books, many of them handwritten from over the centuries and millennia. And when he found out that Western museums or whoever were kind of gobbling up all the Muslim sacred texts, from anywhere in the Middle East, he decided somehow this stuff has to be protected. So anyway, and this is his son, who's now the head of this library. And for like Anne in our group, she was in tears seeing the love with which they had taken care of all this stuff and refurbishing stuff that had been eaten by the worms. And next. So here is a person that is restoring some of the ancient texts that have been destroyed.
How are they destroyed?
Through worms, insects, rain.
Because they were, did they get thrown out?
No, but just over 1,000 years.
Oh, I see.
Things get, most of our books probably may not be around 1,000 years from now. Yes. There is very little, I mentioned there are only 300 Americans a year that visit Iran. There's 4 people that are in official exchanges. So 4 Iranians that are coming to North America and 4 U.S. North Americans that are going to Iran. And these are 2 of the 4, and they're an a Mennonite couple from Indiana. And they have been there for 7 years, and among other things are studying at the Muslim seminary there in Qom. But they were delightful people. But that ought to be multiplied 1,000 times. So Louie and I would often in our free time just go out to the parks and meet interesting people and get into conversations. Sometimes they'd go for an hour, 2 or 3. This was a student at the university in Tehran, and we just sat on this park bench for a couple hours. He was, what was he studying? He kind of filled us in on the concern of many of the students and younger people about the repression that they're feeling, the lack of ability to organize, and but said, when the United States makes threats against us, just people, any possibilities for peaceful change you know, are thrown out the window. And people just rally around the flag, so to speak. Next. So, and all of these people I've met, what was constantly in my mind is if we go to war with Iran, if we start bombing Iran, I mean, these are the people, these are the human beings that are going to be suffering. So these are some of the children that, this was a children's playground in that same park where we met the student.
Looks as if it was quite cold.
Hmm?
It was quite cold. Everybody's wrapped up.
Yeah, it was chilly. So this was, many of you know Medea Benjamin, but this is a young woman, Yalda, that she'd given me. She was a law student who had just passed the bar, and Medea had met her on the bus to Qom, where that's where she passed the bar. And she has relatives in the United States who've immigrated to the United States, but she said, I'm going to stay in Iran to really make this the kind of country that we'd like to see it. And was a really delightful person.
Hey David, was that honorable to put your arm around her like that for a Iranian woman?
I didn't think that you would ask that, Linda. I suppose that was not honorable. So Miles, it was honorable from my point of view. A group called Miles for Peace greeted us, and here you see that Anne, David, you know, welcome to Iran. And there were about 25 young Iranian people who were there to greet us from Miles for Peace. And they are trying to take the message from the Iranian people out to people around the world. Iranian people want peace, and we're not just warmongers. And so 17 of them bicycled throughout Western Europe and then across the United States and met with government leaders and as well as just ordinary people in each country. And actually bicycled to San Francisco and met with Ross Mercurini, who is Iranian American. And one of the things that I want to do is suggest to him, if he's not already thinking about it, is doing a sister city relationship between San Francisco and Tehran or Esfahan, one of the cities there. Next. This gentleman, also from Miles for Peace, is planning in April to swim across the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf is where the American aircraft carriers and all the oil tankers go through. And, you know, this is a flashpoint for potential war. And you may remember a year or two, we said that there were some Iranian boats that, you know, were threatening to attack our boat. Well, it turned out that wasn't accurate, but anyway, he's going to swim across in April. He's already swum across the Caspian Sea. Again, as part of their message, our concern for peace. He said he's actually not as worried about the aircraft carriers as he is about the sharks.
About the pirates.
Hmm?
The pirates.
And this was the our group together with our Iranian friends from Miles for Peace. And I can't see it very well, but they gave each of us a dove carrying a message of peace.
The
Yes.
women, the women also engage in cycling and so forth.
Oh yes, yeah.
So even in that
And
conservative
they showed us
country, they can
a
cycle.
slideshow of their people riding all across Europe and the U.S. with women and men.
So the women wear long garments and, you know, they're dressed according to their own custom while they do it.
As I remember, when they were in other countries, they didn't. And it was interesting on the plane. You know, the women, when you get on in Germany, weren't wearing anything, but when we crossed Iranian airspace, the women all put on the scarves. So this is another group called Messengers of Peace, and they are more focused on the culture of peace and the not so much in politics. And this man, for those of you that no, not this man, this man here has translated Marshall Rosenberg's stuff on nonviolent communication into Farsi. And they showed a book. It's got his picture and Marshall Rosenberg on the front. And they are teaching the culture of peace in the schools. And we're very interested in books. It's one on nonviolence in children, activities for children that they're trying to. They would like to get copies of, translate, and get into the schools and the communities there. They were really very fine folks, and they hope to. They have plans to go to 131 countries, and both these groups are non-governmental, and the Messengers of Peace, for instance, they have very little money, but they make their money teaching English over the internet. And so we visited their office, and that's what most offices, and then a little office in the back is the Messengers of Peace. So this is these are stamps.
You often hear of the government and the guardians of morality cracking down on different groups. Have those two groups we just seen been vulnerable in this way to any form of crackdown?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but because this is videoed, I'd like to hold off on the questions in general.
Okay.
But I know that other groups, the morality police, have, that people have seen them on the streets and saying to a woman, your scarf is too far back or whatever. We actually did not see that at all. And that doesn't mean it's not happening. So this is, these are stamps from during the whole time of the hostage crisis. And this, and the shooting down of the plane. So these were official stamps that we got from a bazaar. But this is the shooting down of the civilian airliner, which is similar for us to the, the Twin Towers. Just shooting down a civilian airliner. Louis actually told them a story. He was in the Air Force. This is an American, now Franciscan priest. And he was up in a plane with orders to shoot down what they were told was a Russian bomber that was coming toward them. That was the final orders, was to shoot him. And they felt a little bit queasy about that and went up kind of next to it so they could see real closely what it was. And when they looked, here were women waving out the windows. So instead of shooting it down, and it was an American civilian airliner. But luckily, because they had not followed orders, it didn't happen. These are the hostages. And this is the CIA, you see, in front of the door of the U.S. Embassy. So that's the U.S. Embassy, and you've heard about the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. I guess it's the largest embassy anywhere in the world. Well, this, it boggled my mind. It's 2 square blocks in size, and their block is probably 1.5 or 2.5 times as long as our blocks. So it's 2 square blocks. And some of them called this the den of spies. I mean, what are all these folks, what were they all doing in Iran? Next. So that's the emblem. It was a little bit defaced. That's the front gate of the U.S. Embassy. And now it hasn't been an embassy for 30 years. But all around it on the wall, which was guarding it, has been, things have been painted. We will make America face a severe defeat, if we try to attack Iran. Yes. And this also on the wall. And Israel is seen as very much both a pawn of American policy and as kind of determining our policy. And they feel it's, you've heard that Ahmadinejad has said we want to destroy Israel. Well, from what I have heard and what I was told on this trip, that was a mistranslation. What he said is a country which takes other people's lands and then tries to destroy them will sow the seeds of its own destruction. Such as what happened to the Soviet Union. It self-destructs rather than somebody's going to bomb it. And they've also said that if the Palestinian people agree to a two-state solution, they will support whatever the Palestinian people agree to. It's not like they're going to do something unilateral. And I'll get to this later, but the Jewish representative in Parliament told us that there is less anti-Semitism in Iran than almost anywhere in Europe. That Iran welcomed Jews, I think it was 200,000?
25,000. 25,000.
25,000 Jews during the Nazi era, when the United States and a lot of the world was shutting their doors. And they said there's not been one attack on a Jewish synagogue in Iran. So it's not an anti-Semitism, it's a feeling that Israel is doing something which is very unjust, and the Palestinian people need to be heard. So, as I said, Israel and the U.S. and we've got the clutches of the world in our hands.
Yeah, excuse me, but there was a thing about the Holocaust deniers. There was a whole thing about that's his name.
Well, yeah, there are people there that are denying the Holocaust.
Including the president of Iran. It's
Yeah.
false stuff.
But
It's false.
the parliament members, for instance, that we talked with, said that's certainly not our position. And I mean, I didn't hear. What we were hearing was that's not a legitimate position, that it didn't exist, that didn't happen, but that it should not be used as an excuse to do horrendous violence to the Palestinians.
Well,
David, could I just speak to that issue?
Yes, please do.
There was a workshop given in the university of which 33 professors attended, and Ahmadinejad wasn't even one of those people. And of those 33 professors, there were 4 extremists who denied the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And from that, the American press has proclaimed that Ahmadinejad and Iran are Holocaust deniers. So that's where it came from. He didn't even attend that workshop.
So the statement that he himself said that I was a Holocaust denier is literally a lie.
That's my understanding.
Let's go on, and then we'll have a discussion after, if that's okay. Next. So this is during the hostage crisis. This is still on the walls of the U.S. Embassy. This is just across the street from the embassy is an Armenian church. And what we were told, as I mentioned earlier, was that both the Armenian and the Assyrian Christian churches are operating freely throughout the country. So one of the things that impressed me was just the beautiful enamelware. And I actually have a bowl here on the table in the back you can take a look at. The next few pictures show some of this. Beautifully made. This was the daughter of the store owner here. Last Supper. So that another outside of the synagogue, do not let your hatred for a group make you depart from justice. And that man can only have the fruit of what he has strived for. So this is the Chal Sotom Museum, or Palace of 40 Columns in Esfahan. After we left Tehran, we flew south to Esfahan. which is a very beautiful city, formerly a capital of Iran. And as you'll see, one of the things that actually we came to feel was just the ancient history of this country. I mean, the thousands of years. And this is just we had this Peace with Iran banner, a code pink banner, that has made several other trips to Iran. And I think right now is in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah.
But it was a very good means of just attracting people to come and join us. Next. So this is some of the walls of this museum. It amazed me that even the steps going upstairs were so beautifully. And that this was Anne with some of the schoolgirls that when they found out that we were Americans just kind of fell in love with each other. And next. So this is Khomeini Square, also known as Imam Square. And on one side was the former government building. On another side was the mosque. Another was the university. And on another side was the shops. And so this was kind of what they saw as the four pillars of their society. So this is the Khomeini Square. This is where we had lunch. Gorgeous work. Next. And this, I mean, I don't know if you can tell, but this is all hand carved. And this is up 60 feet, 80 feet. So that's looking up at the ceiling. So that's all. That's also looking at the ceiling, beautiful. And this was the gentleman that was kind of our guide that day, and he kind of knew every square inch of the whole place. And just you could see how he loved and knew every minute detail. This was, I'm not sure whether that is accurate, whether it's Armenian or Assyrian church. Anybody happen to know? No. Go ahead. And this is another side of the same church.
That's Armenian.
Armenian? Yeah, okay. Further south is, I think, the Assyrian. So this is Esfahan, and it's known for these bridges that I think are thousands of years old and very, very beautiful. Siosei Bridge. And again, this is, I mean, you saw there's 100 arches. This is, each one is so beautifully engraved. And this is walking across the middle, looking out each side.
So it's a pedestrian bridge?
Yeah, not cars. So this is on the last day we were in Esfahan, and I mentioned that one of the most interesting parts of the trip was just meeting people in the park. And I had this shirt that Leslie, who was on an earlier global exchange trip, made, but it says in Farsi and in English, "Peace with Iran." And so I was just walking through this park, and this guy came up and says, "Where are you from?" "I'm from America." And he says, "Oh, welcome to Iran." And he says, "You know, why do we see ourselves as Iranian or American, as Muslim or Christian, as enemies. All the great religions teach us that we should love one another. And we're all brothers and sisters. And we just kind of had an immediate feeling, here's a soul brother. And so we spent a couple hours together. And he was a fireman from Shiraz, just on a holiday up in Esfahan. And after a while, his family came over from the playground. And this was his family. Next. So these are the people that I refuse to call enemies. And I hope that we as the American people will refuse to call enemies. So then we visited Persepolis, which was the capital of the Persian Empire during the, how do you say that, Achaemenid dynasty. And this was like over 2,000 years ago. This was the capital of the Persian Empire at that time. So around 515 BC was when these remains, many of them were built. This was the Cyrus tomb. Next. And Jack, who's a very, he's a very, a man who really takes care of details. After the war or not the war, but the, what do you call it, the tidal wave in Indonesia and Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, he went to help get food and water to the people in Aceh. Well, here he is. This is a desert. Most of Iran is a desert. And he pulled up some water in a bucket out of this ancient well from 2,000 years ago, and is watering this little tree. And by the way, the Miles for Peace is both taking a message of the concern for the Iranian people for peace with the rest of the world, but also the need to save the environment. And this, looking down into the ground in this desert, and I saw these little flowers, and I thought, well, this is a symbol of the peace that needs to grow and develop between our countries and peoples. Those are a couple women that we just met there. Little boys. And this was the place, this is all still at the tomb. And these were some students that come from down on the border with Iraq, in Iran, at the university there. And it was their families that got the brunt of the chemical warfare from Saddam Hussein back in the 80s. Next. And then this is the tombs of their different rulers from over 2,000 years ago. And all these are hand engraved into the rocks, and it made it, in South Dakota, the presidents carved in the rock look like small potatoes compared to this. So there must have been about 15 of these in this rock cliff. You see the intricate. And we had two guides. This is Saeed, Iranian student who was with us most of the time. Next. And then this is Persepolis, and these are the ruins of what is left from 2,500 years ago, where this was the major city and capital of the Persian Empire at that time. And after Peter the Great, I think, conquered this area, a lot of this was either destroyed and or covered with sand and dirt, so it's been re-excavated.
Alexander the Great, it burned down.
Yeah.
Now, Alexander the Great burned it down.
Alexander the Great, yes, yes. Thank you. Next. So, and this was our other guide, Ali, also a student. More bazaars, and the contrast between the black and these beautiful shawls that the women are looking at. There was a lot of colorful shawls being worn. A lot of very colorful stuff being sold as well. Yes. Food. And these are spices. Next. That's just a storefront. And this was in the bazaar, and this was the one day our trip it was raining, and actually here in the middle of the bazaar, the rain was coming through the roof. And here was this fellow with a wheelbarrow load of persimmons. And we got into conversation with him, and he was from Afghanistan. And he had run away from Afghanistan because he didn't want to have to fight in the war, and he didn't want to have to get killed. And so here he is trying to earn enough that he can then head on to Western Europe. But he had a beautiful face. Place we had lunch, and he's making hot, delicious bread in this oven. Mosque, and now we've gone to Shiraz. More beautiful work. And this was in an old bathhouse in Shiraz, and this was kind of rugs, beautiful rugs that were kind of adorning the walls. Next. Iran is really a country of poets, and Hafez is one of their favorite poets, Sufi, and literally thousands of people come here every day to honor him. And this is where his tomb is, and it was actually a great place to meet people as well. And he was some of you know Hafez, but he really, his poems are really focused on love and on God, and there's really a tolerance. Next. And almost any Iranian can quote, Hafez or Rumi, their poems, and they're writing the poems themselves.
What was that?
That was a reflection. That's in the Hafez tomb. This is just the water you see, and it's reflecting the building in the back. It was a very pleasant place. A restaurant honoring Hafez. And then Parisa, this woman, and her fellow students, Louie and I met one evening in the rain, and we sat down and found a place that we could go inside for a while, and then we also went to the Hafez tomb. But they were students of, what are they studying? But anyway, they also told us, almost everybody was very interested in nonviolence. We're looking at how do we put an end to war. And, as some of you know, I've been promoting A Force More Powerful, which is a DVD about powerful nonviolent movements. And these are one of the groups that are going to be promoting that. But they were also telling us, it was interesting, they are afraid that the U.S., they could be at war with the United States, but they say the United States could never be victorious against Iran. They can't even win the war in Iraq, and Iran is a much larger country and much more populous. And although they have severe questions about their government, if attacked, they're going to be supporting it. And what was I going to say? Okay, let's go next. That's a closer up. And we actually went into the hotel to get the DVDs to give them, and when we came back out, she had bought these flowers to give us as symbol of our friendship. Returning to Tehran, that's from the airplane, the beautiful mountains. So on the last day or two that we were there, we met the veterans of the war, the 1980 to 88 war with Iraq. And as you see, some of them had lost their legs, some had lost their eyesight, some were actually hardly able to breathe from the result of the chemical weapons. And what was amazing was these folks were telling their stories, but there was no ounce of wanting to get revenge, but of wanting to commit themselves, or they were committing themselves to try to build a world where there are no weapons of mass destruction, and where we can really live in peace. Next. So this is, and they're building a peace museum to remember that war and to commit themselves that there needs to be peace in the future. So I won't read all that to you, but that's on this. Next. So you see it's a peace stuff. And this medical doctor has been treating these Iranian war vets over the years, and the stories that he told about what people have suffered and are suffering. Some of their friends had just died within the last couple of weeks. And he actually has traveled around the world. The Physicians for Social Responsibility has organized some of his trips. That was some of the results of the chemical warfare. And what we were told was that Iran had the choice of whether to develop chemical weapons and use them in that war, but they decided not to. That this was illegal by international law, and they didn't want to be involved in doing that kind of nonsense. He's showing us the larger Peace Museum is not, I think it opens this summer, but this is just the beginning of it. And we had the opportunity to meet with these Iranian vets and some people from Hiroshima who had come to Iran because they're concerned about abolition of chemical, biological, and nuclear warfare everywhere in the world. And so there were about 40 people in the room, each one telling the story of their loved ones or themselves and what weapons of mass destruction had done to them and their families. And again, what struck me was rather than the feeling of, we're going to do this to somebody else to get back, we need to build a world where there are no weapons of mass destruction. This man on the right, Habib, and this was, I don't have his name, but he was his kind of collaborator. They're filmmakers. And Habib was also in the Iraq-Iran war. And his experiences there were so horrendous that he has decided to spend his life making films to try to get across to the Iranian people the horrors of war. And he came to the closest to being a pacifist of maybe anybody I met on this trip. But he's this film that he's made called Night Bus, which has been shown all over Iran. He was a 16-year-old soldier, and he is taking all these Iraqi prisoners of war away from the front line, blindfolded. And during the course of that bus trip, he begins to see them as human beings rather than just Iraqi soldiers. And so it's a peace film.
Did you see it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I have it with me if anybody would like to see it. Thanks. Next. So this is visiting the Parliament building, and interestingly enough, there's the Parliament speaker, and on either side are these big signs, and this is, I think, Arabic, which says "discuss." So the Parliament members, instead of fighting or arguing with each other, need to discuss to hear all the perspectives. And we had the opportunity to meet representatives in the Parliament that are representing the different religious minorities. So the Christian, the Zoroastrian, and the Jewish representatives. And part of what they were telling us was they do see themselves as a democratic country, and their job is to make sure that the concerns of the people in the religious minorities are heard and respected. And from what they told us, all of the groups they represent are being fully respected and able to worship freely, etc. Next. So this was the Assyrian Christian representative. This was the Jewish representative with Max, who's Jewish and was part of our group. And this was the Armenian Christian representative. So this is our last night in Iran. And this is Shirin and her partner, who are also part of Messengers for Peace. This is in their office. And these are the people that are our greatest allies, who are trying to get out the concerns of the Iranian people, that they want to live in peace in the world, and who, I would like to, our trip was, on that end, was organized by the Foreign Ministry. But from my perspective, these folks would be much, much better to be organizing future delegations. And they're very willing to try to do that. And somebody asked before, but both Miles for Peace and Messengers of Peace are officially recognized. They're not getting government support, but they're allowed, they're legal. Next. So these are just faces of the people that I consider as my friends, and I'll be remembering for the rest of my life. This is a friend from Afghanistan. Next. It's Hamid's family again. So, just like to say a few words in closing, and then hopefully have some time for discussion. The Iranian people have experienced the horrors of war through the war with Iraq. And we met with some of the veterans, I don't have to tell you that. In addition to being able to live in peace and avoid all the death and destruction of war, the U.S. and Iran have a lot of common interests. Iran could be very helpful in helping bring peace to Iraq and Afghanistan, which border both sides of Iran. And actually, after 9/11, the United States was very helpful to the United States in kind of the struggle to defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan. But in return, what they got was Bush calling them part of the axis of evil. So they're hoping for a little bit more reciprocity. Iran and the United States could work together for a genuine peace between Israel and Palestine. We could work toward a nuclear weapons-free Middle East. We have a common desire to rid the world of all weapons of mass destruction. We were amazed to learn that Iran has not attacked another country in the past 200 years. Unfortunately, we can't say the same for the United States. We were struck by the arrogance of our own country. Iran is an ancient country and culture, and the relatively young United States tries to tell Iran how to act, as if it were not a child. This doesn't go over very well in Iran. We need mutual respect in our relations. Real peace can only be built on mutual respect for one another. We should start unconditional negotiations on all issues of mutual concern. From my experience, the Iranian people and the American people would fully support our governments in moving from confrontation and threats to negotiations and peace. And I think, as most people know, the International Atomic Energy Agency has said, and this was confirmed by the U.S. intelligence report this past year, that there's been no sign of Iran working on developing nuclear weapons since 2003. And Iranian religious leaders told us that developing or using nuclear weapons is immoral, and therefore Iran would never develop nuclear weapons. My hope and my prayer is that we can move from the axis of evil to the axis of friendship. Let's leave the old politics of confrontation and war behind and replace them with the politics of peace and friendship.